I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. She whispered it like a confession, like something she'd been carrying alone for months. But she wasn't paranoid. She never was. There was a dark blue SUV parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted, wheels already turned toward the exit. And a 20-year-old mechanic named Noah Bennett had been watching it for 48 minutes because something about it didn't make sense. That one decision to keep watching instead of looking away was about to change everything. If this story moves you, please subscribe, hit the bell and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Noah Bennett had turned 20 years old 3 weeks ago, and nobody had thrown him a party. That wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact, the kind of quiet, unremarkable fact that defined most of his life. He worked at a small roadside repair shop in northern Ohio, a place that smelled permanently of motor oil and burnt coffee. He clocked in at 7 in the morning. He clocked out whenever the last car was done. He ate lunch outside because the break room had no windows, and he'd spent enough of his life in closed spaces. He wasn't unhappy. He wasn't particularly happy either. He existed in the middle place where most young men without much money and without many connections spent their 20s doing the work, keeping their head down, watching the world move past them like traffic on a highway they hadn't yet found an entrance ramp to. But Noah had one thing that set him apart from almost everyone around him. He noticed things. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way detectives notice things in television shows with swelling music and close-up camera shots. He noticed things the way a mechanic notices things quietly, methodically, the way you train yourself to see what other people ignore, because ignoring something broken is how people get hurt. He noticed the way an engine sounded different on a cold morning versus a warm one. He noticed the way brake pads wore unevenly on a car whose alignment was off. He noticed the things that didn't fit, the things that didn't match the small wrongnesses that other people dismissed because they were too small to seem important. That ability had never mattered much outside of the repair shop. Until the afternoon, he sat outside the Lucky Fork diner with a sandwich. He wasn't really eating and noticed a dark blue SUV parked across the street. It wasn't the car itself that caught his attention. It was the engine. Most people, when they park and wait, shut off their engine. They do it automatically without thinking. It saves gas, it's quieter. It's just what you do. Leaving an engine running while you sit in a parked car is something you do when you plan to leave quickly, when you want to be ready, when you don't want the sound of a starting engine to announce your departure. Noah noticed it because he'd heard it the moment he sat down, a low, steady idle, present underneath all the other sounds of the afternoon. The distant traffic, the wind, the occasional bell above the diner door. He looked up. Dark blue SUV, late model, tinted windows but not blacked out, just dark enough that you couldn't see the faces inside clearly. Parked on the street directly across from the Lucky Forks entrance. He went back to his sandwich. A minute passed. 2 minutes. 3. The engine kept running. He looked up again. Something about the front wheels made him stop chewing. They weren't straight. Most people, when they park, let their wheels straighten out naturally. It's automatic. You don't think about it. But the front wheels of that SUV were turned slightly but deliberately toward the road, toward the exit, pointed in the direction of movement rather than at rest. Those were wheels that had been positioned, not parked, prepared. Noah set down his sandwich. He started paying attention. 7 minutes after he first noticed the wheels, the door of the Lucky Fork diner opened and a young woman walked out. Blonde hair, mid to late 20s. She moved like someone tired but trying not to show it, a particular kind of exhaustion that Noah recognized from his mother, from women who carried too many responsibilities and too little support and had learned to make it look like ordinary life. She stopped beside a silver Honda Civic about 30 feet from the diner entrance, reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, stared at the screen for a moment with an expression that could have been frustration or relief. It was hard to tell from across the lot. Then she looked up, glanced around the parking lot the way people do when they feel watched but can't explain why, and went back inside. Inside the SUV, something moved. It was subtle. It was the kind of movement you'd miss if you weren't already watching. The driver's head turned, just slightly, tracking her. And on the passenger side, a shape that had been leaning back shifted forward, attention, suddenly sharpened body language. changing the way a cat changes when it spots movement across the room. Then she went back inside, and the SUV settled, relaxed, like whatever signal had spiked had gone quiet again. Noah's stomach turned in a way that had nothing to do with his lunch. He waited. 9 minutes later, she came out again. A different reason this time. She was carrying a to-go bag, talking on her phone, walking toward her car with a specific kind of purpose that meant she was about to leave. Inside of my SUV, the same thing happened. The driver's head turned, the passenger leaned forward. This time Noah could see the driver's hands move to the steering wheel. Ready. She stopped at her car, opened the back door, put the bag inside, said something into her phone, laughed at something the other person said. Closed the door and then, apparently remembering something, walked back toward the diner entrance. Inside the SUV, the hands left the steering wheel. The shape settled back. The engine kept running. Noah had seen enough. He couldn't explain it in technical terms. He couldn't have written it up as a police report or articulated it in the calm language of someone who knew exactly what they were witnessing. But in the bones of him, in the place where 20 years of noticing small wrongnesses had built something like instinct, he knew. That car was watching her, and whoever was inside it had been watching her for a long time. He sat with that knowledge for about 90 seconds, which was, he would later realize, about 90 seconds longer than he should have. The voice in his head, the same voice that told every young man in his position to stay out of it, to mind his business, to avoid the kind of situations that escalate into something you can't walk back from, was working hard. It ran through every reasonable explanation it could construct. Private investigator, domestic argument, someone waiting for a friend who was running late, someone taking a work call, someone asleep behind the wheel. Noah had watched the person inside that car track that woman twice in less than 15 minutes. He had watched their hands move to the steering wheel the moment it looked like she was leaving. None of the reasonable explanations survived that. I was still sitting there working up whatever the opposite of courage was that he needed to overcome when the motorcycles came. 12 of them. They came in from the main road in the kind of loose, easy formation that experienced riders fall into, automatically not showing off, not performing, just moving together the way people do when they've ridden together for long enough that it becomes natural. The engines were loud. They were supposed to be loud. That was just what those machines were. They pulled into the parking lot of the Lucky Fork Diner with the calm, unhurried confidence of people who had stopped at 1,000 diners in 1,000 small towns and expected nothing more extraordinary than bad coffee and a decent slice of pie. Noah knew who they were before he read the patches. Not personally, but the way you know things when you grow up in a particular world, from stories, from reputation, from the specific way certain names get spoken by certain people, either with respect or with fear, or with some complicated mixture of both. Hell's Angles. The letters were large and deliberate on the back of their cuts, the leather vests that carried the full identity of who they were and where they stood in the world. Northern Ohio chapter. Established. Present. At the center of them was a man who rode with the particular ease of someone who had been doing this since before Noah was born. Gray-haired, heavily built, his face had the quality of weathered wood, not harsh exactly, but permanent, like something that had seen weather and kept standing anyway. Raymond Mercer, Ray. Chapter leader, a man about whom Noah had heard two kinds of stories, the kind that scared you and the kind that earned your respect, and had never been entirely sure which kind was true. Now he was 30 feet away, swinging his leg off a machine with the ease of long habit, and Noah was sitting there with the knowledge that something wrong was happening across the street and the complete inability to decide what to do about it. He almost didn't say anything. That's the honest truth of it. He almost convinced himself it wasn't his business. Almost convinced himself that he'd read the situation wrong, that he was a 20-year-old mechanic who worked on other people's cars and had no business inserting himself into something he didn't understand. Almost convinced himself that the right thing to do was nothing, because nothing was safe and safe was what he understood. But the image of that driver's hands moving to the steering wheel, ready, waiting patient, kept rising up through everything else. He stood up. His heart was doing something uncomfortable. He was aware of it, aware of how his hands weren't entirely steady, aware that what he was about to do was the kind of thing that could go wrong in any number of directions. Walking up to the leader of a motorcycle club and saying you think something suspicious is happening because of wheel positioning and engine idling was not exactly the kind of thing that landed well if the other person decided to think you were wasting their time. He walked over anyway. Ray was talking to one of his riders, a large man. The others seemed to call Bear, which was not a creative nickname, but was, Noah had to admit, an accurate one when Noah stopped a respectful few feet away and waited. Ray looked at him. Not an aggressive look, not a dismissive one, just the steady measuring look of a man who had spent decades reading people quickly and accurately and had gotten very good at it. Yeah, Ray said. It wasn't a question exactly, more of an invitation. Noah's voice came out steadier than he expected. Sir, I think that car across the street is watching a woman who's inside this diner. A pause. Ray didn't look at the car. He kept looking at Noah. How long? 48 minutes, Noah said. Maybe a few minutes more now. What makes you think they're watching someone specific? Noah pointed careful, low, not dramatic, toward the front wheels of the SUV. The wheels are turned toward the road, not parked, pointed to leave. Engine's been running the whole time. Every time a woman in a gray jacket came outside in the last 15 minutes, somebody inside that car moved. Hands went to the steering wheel the second it looked like she was leaving. Ray was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt like thought rather than skepticism. What kind of car? Dark blue SUV, late model, tinted windows. I'd say it's been there since before I came out for lunch. Another pause. Why are you telling me? Ray asked. It was a fair question. Noah had been asking it himself for the last 10 minutes. Because, Noah said slowly, I don't have a phone that works well enough to call anything in. And because you're here, and because, he hesitated, because it looked wrong and I didn't want to pretend I hadn't seen it. Ray held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he turned, not dramatically, not urgently, just turned and said something low to Bear, who nodded once and moved away from them with the quiet, deliberate efficiency of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Within 45 seconds, and Noah would think about this later, the 45 seconds of it, the 12 riders had spread through the parking lot with the organic, unhurried naturalness of people simply choosing where to stand and where to lean. Nobody was looking at the SUV. Nobody was making a scene. Nobody was doing anything that could be called threatening or aggressive. But every sightline from the SUV to the diner entrance was covered. Every exit from the parking lot had someone near it. And the SUV, if it had been watching, would have noticed that the available space had quietly, completely changed. Ray came back and stood beside Noah. Where are they positioned exactly? He asked quietly. Noah described it again. The wheels, the engine, the movement pattern, the timing. Ray listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, You work on cars? Yes, sir. You notice wheel position from across a parking lot? I notice things like that, Noah said. I don't, it's just what I do. Ray nodded slowly the way someone nods when they're filing information rather than agreeing with something. Okay, he said. That was all he said. But somehow in the simple weight of that one word, Noah felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized had been clenched tight. For the next 7 minutes, nothing dramatic happened. That was in its own way the most dramatic part. Nothing happened because the riders were good at not making things happen before things needed to happen. They stood near their bikes. They talked to each other. One of them went inside and came out with 2 cups of coffee. Everything looked completely ordinary, but the SUV didn't move. And it didn't move in a particular way, in the way something doesn't move when it has realized it is being watched and has decided that moving suddenly would confirm what the people watching it already suspect. The engine, Noah noted, was still running. Sham. Then Claire Morgan came outside for the 3rd time. He learned her name later. In that moment, she was just the woman in the gray jacket, the one who had triggered the movement inside the SUV twice already, the one who apparently had no idea that a complicated and frightening machinery had been operating around her life for what was beginning to seem like a very long time. She came out talking on her phone again. Different call. Her body language was different, more relaxed, something that might have been her making plans with a friend or checking in with a babysitter. She walked toward her car with the ease of someone who thought the afternoon was about to become ordinary again. Ray said quietly 2 words, stay ready. Nobody visibly reacted, but something in the lot shifted in attentiveness, a tightening of focus, the particular quality of stillness that precedes movement. Claire reached her car. She opened the door. And inside the SUV, the driver's hands went back to the steering wheel. Bear, from his position near the lot exit, turned very slightly toward Ray. Ray gave the smallest possible shake of his head. Not yet. Claire got into her car. The SUV's wheels moved just a fraction, just a tiny adjustment forward in their turn toward the road. And then something unexpected happened. Claire's car didn't start. They could all hear it, the ignition trying and failing, the specific uncooperative sound of an engine that wasn't going to cooperate. Claire tried again, same result. She got out of the car, phone still in hand, expression shifting from mild frustration to something more strained. Inside the SUV, no movement, waiting, recalibrating. Ray looked at Noah. Noah looked back. She's going back inside, Noah said quietly, because her body language was already saying it. She was looking at her phone, probably searching for a number, probably calling a friend or a roadside service. Yeah, Ray said. They'll wait, Noah said. Yeah, Ray said again. They will. He said it like a man who had just made a decision about something and was already past the point of reconsidering it. Ray walked toward the SUV alone. He didn't hurry. He didn't take anyone with him. He crossed the street with the unhurried ease of a man who had walked toward difficult situations for a long time and understood that how you approach something shapes everything that comes after it. Noah watched from the lot. His heart was moving fast again, but there was something different in it now. Not just fear, but something almost like focus. Ray stopped at the driver's side window of the SUV. He knocked on it. 2 knocks. Patient. The way you knock when you already know someone is home. The window came down. Noah couldn't hear the conversation from across the street. He could see the shape of it. Ray's posture, which stayed relaxed and non-threatening. The almost imperceptible stiffening of the figure inside the car when they realized that the man standing at their window was not intimidated, was not confused, was not going to be redirected by a simple story. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When Ray came back across the street, he stopped beside Noah and didn't say anything for a moment. Then there are 2 of them, driver and passenger. They're calling themselves private investigators. Are they? Noah asked. Might be, Ray said. Whether they're licensed or not, I don't know. But they've got a folder on the front seat. He paused. A lot of photographs. Noah's stomach dropped. Of her. Ray nodded once. Her car. Her at what looks like a grocery store. Her leaving a building that's probably her job. He paused again. And her walking with a little kid. The afternoon suddenly felt different. Not just suspicious anymore. Something with more weight to it. More damage already done. The specific heaviness of a situation that had been going on for a long time before anyone had looked up and noticed it. I asked them who hired them, Ray said. What did they say? Ray looked at him. Nothing. He let that sit for a moment. But what they didn't say told me more than they wanted it to. Noah was still processing that when Bear came around the side of the building with an expression that meant he had information. Got the plate, Bear said quietly to Ray. And I saw through the passenger window when he leaned out. That folder, it's not just photographs. There's a long times and locations going back. He stopped, did a quick estimate in his head. Looks like maybe 2 months, maybe more. Ray absorbed this. 2 months, he said like he was tasting how wrong it was. Minimum, Bear said. Noah thought about the woman Claire, though he didn't know that yet, trying to start her car. Sitting in the parking lot, completely unaware that 2 strangers had been documenting her life for 2 months. That there was a folder with pictures of her son in a car 30 feet from where she was currently sitting. We need to call this in, Noah said. Ray was already pulling out his phone. Already on it, he said. Then he paused, looked at Noah with something that might have been the beginning of respect, the kind that isn't given, just recognized. You said 48 minutes when I first asked you. Yes, sir. You'd been watching them for 48 minutes before you came over. Yes, sir. Why'd it take you that long? Noah thought about it, answered honestly, because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to be wrong. Ray was quiet for a moment then, but you came over anyway. I came over because being wrong seemed better than doing nothing and being right. Ray didn't respond to that immediately. He looked back at the SUV where the 2 investigators sat unmoving, probably understanding by now that their afternoon had taken a significant turn in a direction they hadn't planned for. When Ray looked back at Noah, something in his expression had settled. Stay close, he said. Police are going to want to talk to you." "About what?" Noah said. "I just noticed a car." Ray almost smiled. A 20-year-old mechanic who can document the exact wheel angle engine behavior and surveillance timing of an investigative operation from across a parking lot over the course of an hour. He shook his head slightly. "You didn't just notice a car, you built a case." Noah hadn't thought of it that way. He stood there for a moment with the sound of the SUV's engine finally cutting off across the street, someone inside it apparently deciding that the running engine was no longer sending the right message, and thought about what it meant that he had almost not said anything, almost convinced himself it was none of his business. Almost looked away. Almost. The difference between almost and actually was exactly the distance between that parking lot bench and where he was standing now. And somewhere inside the Lucky Fork diner, a woman named Claire Morgan was on her phone arranging a tow truck for a car with a dead battery, completely unaware that the 48 minutes she had spent inside that diner having lunch had been a countdown to something, and that a 20-year-old mechanic who noticed things had just without entirely meaning to made sure the clock ran out in her favor instead of someone else's. The police arrived 11 minutes later, and that was when everything that had been hidden started coming into the light. The first officer who arrived was young, younger than Noah expected, maybe 23, 24, with the kind of careful professionalism that people put on when they haven't yet decided whether the situation in front of them is serious or a waste of their afternoon. He looked at the SUV, he looked at Ray, he looked at Noah, and then he looked at Ray again the way people do when they're trying to figure out which person in a crowd represents the most complicated variable. Ray watched him do it and didn't say anything. Noah spoke first. "I'm the one who called it in," he said. "Or somebody called it in. I'm the one who noticed the car." The officer turned to him. His name tag said Dylan. "Okay, what did you notice?" Noah told him. The same things he'd told Ray, but slower this time, more methodical, the way you talk to someone whose job it is to write things down and whose opinion of your credibility will determine what happens next. The wheel angle, the running engine, the timing pattern, the movement inside the vehicle every time the woman in the gray jacket came outside. Officer Dylan listened, wrote, listened some more. Then he walked across the street to the SUV. Ray stood beside Noah, and they both watched the conversation happen through the windshield, or rather they watched the body language of it, because that was all they had access to from where they stood. The investigators were talking. Officer Dylan was listening. The folder was on the front seat, visible enough that the officer would have noticed it the moment the window came down. "Think he'll do anything?" Noah asked quietly. "Depends," Ray said. "On what?" "On whether what they're doing is technically legal." Ray said it without judgment, just as information. Following someone in a public space, photographing them in public spaces, a lot of that is legal. The question is what they do with it and who told them to do it. Noah hadn't thought about that. He'd been so focused on the wrongness of the situation, the predatory patience of it, the folder, the photographs of the little kid, that the question of legality had felt secondary to the question of decency. "Even if it's legal," he said slowly, "it's still." "Yeah," Ray said, "it is." They stood there together while Officer Dylan came back across the street looking like a man who had just been told something he wasn't sure how to categorize. "They say they're private investigators working a domestic case," Dylan said. He looked at Noah specifically, which Noah found interesting. "Surveillance is legal as long as it's conducted in public spaces." "Did you see the folder?" Ray asked. Dylan paused. "I did. The photographs of the kid." Another pause. Longer. "They say it's standard documentation for a custody evaluation." Noah felt something cold move through him. Custody. The word landed differently than anything else so far. It explained things, the pattern, the patience, the months of documentation, and it made the situation worse at the same time, because he suddenly understood that whatever was happening to the woman in the gray jacket was not random. It was not opportunistic. It was part of a system that had been running quietly and deliberately around her life. "There's a little boy," Noah said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It just seemed important that someone in the official conversation acknowledged that specific fact. Dylan looked at him. "I understand." "Do you?" Noah said, and immediately regretted the sharpness of it, not because it was wrong, but because sharp wasn't useful here. He softened. "Sorry, she doesn't know. She's inside right now, and she doesn't know any of this is happening. We're going to need to speak with her, Dylan said. She's having her car towed, Noah said. Battery died. She's waiting inside. Dylan nodded, made a note. Anyone else from your party a witness to the vehicle behavior? Ray answered before Noah could. Several of my riders observed the vehicle maintaining a stationary position with engine running for an extended period. Some of them can confirm the wheel angle. Bear. He gestured toward the large man who had been watching from near the lot exit. He got close enough to see inside the passenger window. The folder, the photographs. He can speak to what he saw. Dylan looked at Ray for a moment. The calculation happening behind his eyes was not subtle. This was a police officer deciding how to weigh testimony from a Hells Angels chapter leader against whatever assumptions he walked in with. Ray met the look without flinching, without challenge, just steady. I understand you might have certain feelings about taking statements from my people, Ray said quietly. But my people watched what this young man, he nodded at Noah, had already identified. We didn't approach the vehicle until after we'd observed the same behavior he described. Everything we saw is factual and documented in our own memories. You can take it or leave it. But Claire Morgan deserves to know what's been going on around her. The use of her name stopped Dylan. How do you know her name? I don't, Ray said. Bear found it on a document inside the vehicle. It was visible through the window. Claire Morgan, the case file has her name on the outside of it. Dylan wrote something down. His face had shifted, not dramatically, but in the way faces shift when a situation reveals more weight than initially assessed. Okay, he said. I'm going to go inside and speak with Miss Morgan. I'd appreciate it if everyone stayed available. He went inside. Noah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The next few minutes were the kind that felt longer than they were. Bear came over and stood with them. He was quieter than his size suggested, that specific kind of quiet, that big men sometimes have the patience of someone who has learned that they don't need to fill space with noise because they already fill it with presence. The folder's thick, he said to Ray, low enough that it was just for them. How thick? Thick enough to be months, not weeks. Bear glanced at Noah. You said you clocked 48 minutes today. From what I could see, today's just a page in a much longer book. Noah thought about that. Months, 2 months at minimum, Bear had said earlier. But what if it was more? What if someone had been sitting in cars outside this woman's life for longer than that, clicking a camera, at ordinary moments she thought were private, the grocery store, the school pickup line, the walk from her front door to her car? She said she wasn't imagining it, Noah said quietly. Both men looked at him. I don't know that for certain, he clarified. I just looking at that folder. If she had any sense that something was off, she was right. She wasn't imagining it. Ray said nothing, but something in his expression confirmed that he'd landed on the same thought. Inside the diner through the window, Noah could see Officer Dylan approaching a table. He could see the woman in the gray jacket look up. He could see the exact moment her face changed, not with fear, not immediately, but with something that looked almost like recognition. Like a person who has been waiting for confirmation of something they already knew and didn't want to know. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked out the window at the parking lot, and for a second through the glass across the distance, her eyes found Noah's. He held the look for a second, then looked away. Because whatever she was feeling in that moment was hers, and he had no right to watch it. She came outside 12 minutes later. Not because anyone asked her to, she just came. The door opened and there she was, still in the gray jacket, her eyes red at the edges but dry now, chin up, with the specific kind of composure that comes, not from not feeling things, but from having decided that feeling things in private is the only luxury you can afford. She stopped a few feet from Noah. You're the one who saw them, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him. Really looked at him the way people look at strangers when they are trying to understand what kind of person would notice something like that and then act on it. How long had they been there? Almost an hour when I noticed them, probably longer before that. Her jaw tightened. How many times did they? She stopped, started again. When I came outside, how many times did they? 3 times, Noah said. Every time you came out, someone inside the car moved. Hands went to the steering wheel. She absorbed that. Her throat moved. I told my attorney, she said, not to Noah specifically, more to the air, to whoever was listening to the specific cruelty of having said a thing out loud and been told it wasn't real. 3 weeks ago, I told Megan I thought someone was following me. She said I was probably under stress, that the case was making me hypersensitive. Noah didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. She's not a bad attorney, Claire said quickly defensively, the way people defend the people who failed them when the failure had good intentions behind it. She didn't have any proof, and without proof, you have proof now, Ray said. Claire looked at him. Ray held her gaze with the same steadiness. He held everything. No performance of warmth, but no absence of it either. Just a man who understood the weight of what he was saying and said it anyway. The folder is evidence. The photographs are evidence. The officers are documenting the vehicle. And he glanced at Noah. This young man can put them here for the better part of an hour with detailed observations. Claire looked back at Noah. Something moved across her face. What's your name? Noah, he said. Noah Bennett. Do you know why they were watching me? He hesitated, then decided she deserved the honest answer. From what little I overheard, it sounds like a custody situation, that's all I know. She nodded once, slowly, like someone pressing a thumbtack into a wall. My son's name is Eli, she said. He's 7. She paused. His father and I, she stopped again. Whatever she had been about to say was apparently something she'd decided not to say to a stranger in a parking lot. There's a hearing in 3 weeks. Noah did the math without meaning to. 3 weeks, a folder thick enough to represent months of surveillance. Someone had been building something piece by piece, photograph by photograph, entry by entry, in a log building a version of Claire Morgan's life that could be presented in a courtroom. Not necessarily a true version, a useful one. I'm going to need a statement from you, Dylan said, reappearing from somewhere behind them. He was looking at Noah. Detailed as you can make it, times observations, everything you told me earlier. I'll write it down if that helps, Noah said. Even better. I remember it all, Noah said. And he did. That was the thing about noticing things they stayed with you. The wheel angle, the engine, the exact number of minutes, the precise nature of the movement inside the vehicle. It was all still there, clear and specific, the way nothing important ever quite leaves the mind of a person who was raised to pay attention. While Dylan went back to his cruiser, and while Ray moved away to speak quietly with a few of his riders, Noah stood with Claire for a moment in the particular quiet that follows revelation. She looked at her silver Civic, still sitting there, with its dead battery and its waiting to be towed status. I was going to go pick up Eli from school, she said. I was going to take him to get ice cream. I do that on Thursdays. We have this thing. She stopped. Her voice had gone smaller, not from weakness, but from the sudden, overwhelming presence of everything that was at stake. He knows Thursday means ice cream. He counts on it. You'll still get to do that, Noah said. She looked at him sideways. You sound very confident about that. He said. And he was though he couldn't entirely have explained why. Maybe it was the way Ray had positioned his riders without being asked. Maybe it was the look on Dylan's face when he saw the photographs of the child. Maybe it was just the fundamental unfairness of the situation pressing against his sense of how things should work. I've been so careful, Claire said quietly. For months I've taken different routes. I've varied my schedule. I've avoided posting anything on social media. I've been so careful. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands weren't. She pressed them together, and they still knew. Every time, they always seemed to know. Noah heard what she was saying underneath what she was saying. If she'd been that careful, route changes, schedule variation, deliberate unpredictability, then the photographs in that folder couldn't have come purely from surveillance. Someone had helped. Someone had known her schedule, not because they'd figured it out by watching. Someone had known it because someone close to her had told them. He didn't say that out loud, not then, not to her in a parking lot with her eyes already carrying more weight than they should have to, but landed in him like a stone into still water, and the ripples from it didn't stop. It was Bear who found it, not intentionally. He had gone back to the street side, standing near the SUV, while Officer Dillon conducted his extended interaction with the investigators. And through the passenger window, the angle was better from that side, and the investigators, rattled now, and focused on the officer at the driver's window, had stopped being careful about what was visible. Bear could see the open folder more clearly. He came back with an expression that had changed. He pulled Ray aside. Noah was close enough to hear. Third page in Bear said, it's a log, time entries, location entries. But some of them, he paused, looked for the right word. Some of them are inside information, times that match her schedule exactly, not approximate. Exact. The kind of exact you get from someone who knows someone's routine from the inside. Ray was very still. One entry, Bear continued, is labeled per source, not observed, not documented. Per source, meaning someone told them. The words hit the air and didn't leave it. Ray turned slowly and looked at Claire, who was 15 feet away, talking to Officer Dillon, probably running through the details of the past few months, all the ways she'd felt watched, all the moments of inexplicable unease, all the times she'd told herself she was imagining it. She has someone in her life who's feeding them information, Ray said. It wasn't a question. Has to be, Bear said. No other way to get that specific. Noah stood there with this new knowledge, sitting on top of everything else, and felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. He'd walked over to a man on a motorcycle because he'd noticed a car. He'd thought he was identifying a surveillance operation. He had identified a surveillance operation, but it was larger than he'd understood. More deliberate, more personal. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to document Claire's life. They had recruited someone from inside it. Zang. The second police cruiser arrived 20 minutes after the first. This one had 2 officers, and one of them, a woman named Sergeant Kara Aldridge, who moved with the kind of calm authority that suggested she had seen more complicated things than a surveillance dispute in a diner parking lot, immediately took control of the interaction at the SUV. Noah watched her approach the investigator's vehicle and felt for the first time since he'd walked across the parking lot to Ray something that might be called relief. Not because the situation was resolved, it wasn't close to resolved, but because the right people were now inside it. He gave his formal statement to Officer Dillon in the corner of the parking lot, standing beside a concrete post, speaking slowly and carefully the way he'd learned to speak when he wanted to be sure something was heard exactly as he meant it. He said everything he could remember in the order he'd observed it. Dillon typed on a tablet, occasionally asking clarifying questions, occasionally pausing to read back a section to make sure he'd captured it correctly. When they were done, Dillon said, "This is a very complete account." "I remember things," Noah said. Clearly, Dillon hesitated. "Wheel angle is that's not something most people would notice. I work on cars." Still, Noah shrugged. He didn't know how to explain it more than that. You either saw the things that didn't fit or you didn't. He'd always seen them. It had never seemed like a skill before, just a way of being in the world. He looked over at the SUV where Sergeant Aldridge was now asking one of the investigators to step out of the vehicle. That was new. That meant something had changed. It had. What Aldridge had found, or more precisely, what the investigators had eventually admitted under the pressure of a sergeant who clearly knew when she was being given a partial story, was not just the folder. It was a second folder, a smaller one, tucked beneath the first. And inside it were documents that had no business being in the hands of private investigators working a standard custody documentation case. Legal strategy notes, not court filings, those were public record. These were internal, the kind of notes an attorney writes for themselves, thinking out loud about what arguments to build, what vulnerabilities to address, what timeline to present. The kind of notes that exist inside attorney-client privilege and nowhere else. Claire Morgan's attorney's notes, in the hands of investigators hired by the other side of her custody case. When Aldridge carried the smaller folder across the street and showed it to Claire, Noah watched the color leave Claire's face in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a very specific, devastating kind of recognition. She stopped. Her voice had gone strange. I've seen that handwriting. That's Megan's handwriting. Aldridge waited. That's my attorney's handwriting, Claire said. Those are her notes. How? She looked at Aldridge. How do they have my attorney's notes? That, Aldridge said steadily, is exactly what we're going to find out. Claire turned away for a moment, just a few seconds, just long enough to compose herself in the particular way of a person who has just had the ground they'd been standing on revealed as hollow. When she turned back, her eyes were dry, but something in them had hardened in a way that looked permanent. They knew what we were going to argue, she said. In court, they knew our strategy before the hearing. She said it flat and clear, laying it out like a blueprint. That's why Daniel's team has been 2 steps ahead every time. That's why every time Megan thought she had something, it didn't land the way it should have. Nobody disagreed with her. Because the math of it was simple and terrible. If your opponent knows your legal strategy before you walk into the courtroom, you are not fighting a fair fight. You are fighting a fight that was decided before it started. Noah stood at the edge of this conversation and understood that what had begun as him noticing a parked car had walked him into the middle of something much larger and much darker than a surveillance vehicle sitting outside a diner. Someone had accessed confidential legal information. Someone had delivered it to the opposition. Someone somewhere in Claire Morgan's life had made a choice that had been quietly destroying her for months. And that someone was not in the SUV. Ray came to stand beside Noah again. That was becoming a pattern, the two of them standing side by side at the edge of events watching while other people moved through them. "You okay?" Ray asked. Noah thought about it honestly. "I think I'm angry," he said. "Good," Ray said. "Is it?" "Anger means you understand what's wrong," Ray said. "Better than confusion, better than looking away." Noah looked at Claire, who was now speaking intensely with Sergeant Aldridge. Her hands moving the way hands move when someone is finally able to say out loud things they've been carrying in silence. "Somebody in her life did this," Noah said. "Yeah." "Someone she trusted." "Yeah." "How do you—" Noah stopped, started differently. "How does someone find out who it is?" Ray was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way of someone who has lived long enough to know that the most important things are often said very simply. "You let the evidence speak," he said. "You don't chase people. You don't accuse people. You gather what's there and you let it tell the story on its own terms, because the truth doesn't need help, it just needs room." Noah turned that over. "And if the room doesn't get made," he asked. Ray looked at him. "Then you make sure the people who can make it know what they're looking for." Which was Noah was starting to understand exactly what had been happening for the past 90 minutes. Not a confrontation, not a rescue, something quieter and more durable than either of those things. A series of people paying attention, refusing to look away, and making sure that the things that had been kept in shadow had enough light shone on them that they couldn't go back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a chase or a fight or a scene from something. It was just people choosing over and over to stay present. Sergeant Aldridge made a phone call from the middle of the parking lot. Her expression during the call was controlled, but intense in the way of someone delivering information they understand is significant. When she finished, she came directly to Claire. "I need you to contact your attorney," she said. "Right now, don't text, call, and tell her what you've just seen." Claire already had her phone in her hand. "And Miss Morgan," Aldridge paused, "when you speak to her, be aware that we don't yet know how the information in that folder was obtained. Until we do, be careful about what you share with anyone. Claire held the officer's gaze for a moment. In that moment, something passed between them, the specific understanding of two people who both knew what it meant to have been careful and still not careful enough. "I understand," Claire said. She stepped away and dialed. Noah watched her walk to the far end of the parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders pulled back in the posture of someone preparing for a conversation that was going to be hard. He looked down at the concrete. He thought about the 48 minutes he'd almost let pass without saying anything. He thought about the voice in his head that had worked so hard to convince him that it was none of his business. He thought about a 7-year-old boy named Eli who counted on ice cream on Thursdays. And then he thought about the fact that somewhere in some part of this story he hadn't yet seen, there was a person, someone Claire had trusted. Someone she'd told things to, someone who had sat across from her at a table and smiled and listened and then walked away and sold what they'd heard. And that person didn't know yet that the folder in the investigator's car had survived the afternoon. Didn't know yet that a 20-year-old mechanic had noticed the wheel angle on a parked SUV. Didn't know yet that the evidence was no longer hidden. Didn't know yet that the truth, as Ray had put it, had been given room. The investigators were placed in separate cruisers at 7 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. Both folders went into evidence. Sergeant Aldridge made 2 more phone calls. Bear gave his statement to the second officer. 3 other riders from Ray's group gave theirs. And across the parking lot, Claire Morgan finished her call to her attorney, lowered her phone, and stood very still for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the group. Her eyes were clear, her hands were steady, and for the first time since Noah had seen her come out of the diner, she looked like a person who understood exactly what kind of fight she was in and had decided she was not going to lose it. She stopped in front of Ray. "Thank you," she said. Ray shook his head, slightly, the kind of gesture that redirects credit rather than deflects it. "Thank him," he said and nodded at Noah. Claire looked at Noah. He looked back. "I just noticed a car," he said for what felt like the fourth time that afternoon. But Claire shook her head, and something in her eyes said she understood what it had actually cost him to say something. The second guessing, the almost didn't, the voice that said stay out of it. "No," she said quietly. "You saw me." Noah didn't have an answer for that. He didn't need one. Somewhere in the evidence bags, now riding in a police cruiser, was a log that said, per source, and whatever that source turned out to be. They were about to find out what it felt like to have been the one thing in this story that failed to stay hidden. The investigation had shifted. The hearing was 3 weeks away, and Megan Foster, attorney at law, was about to receive a phone call that would change everything she thought she knew about her own case, including the question of who exactly had been reading her notes. Megan Foster got the call at 4:22 in the afternoon, sitting at her desk with a cold cup of coffee and a stack of files that had been waiting 3 days for her attention. She was the kind of attorney who worked Thursdays like they were Mondays, no winding down, no coasting toward the weekend, just the same, grinding forward motion that had built her practice from nothing into something she was quietly proud of. She picked up on the second ring because she always picked up on the second ring. First ring was too eager. Third ring was too slow. Second ring was professional. She had rules like that, small, precise habits that added up to a version of herself she trusted. "Claire?" She heard the tone in her client's voice immediately. Not panic, something worse than panic. The specific flatness that comes after panic has burned through and left behind something harder and colder. "Claire, what happened?" Claire told her. Megan listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. She was a person who thought faster than most people spoke and had the impatient habit of finishing sentences before they were finished. But something in Claire's voice made her go still. She sat with the phone pressed to her ear and let the story come in its full shape without touching it. When Claire stopped talking, Megan said nothing for 3 seconds. "Then read me exactly what the document looked like, the one in the smaller folder." "Describe the handwriting." Claire described it. Another silence. Longer this time. "Claire," Megan said carefully, and her voice had changed in a way that Claire noticed immediately. "I need you to stay where you are. I'm coming to you." "Megan." "The notes you're describing," Megan said, and she stopped. Started again, slower, like someone walking across ice and testing each step. "Those notes were in my case file, my physical case file in my office." She paused. "I am the only person with a key to that file cabinet." The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. "Megan," Claire said quietly, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying—" Megan stopped again. When she spoke next, her voice was stripped of its professional control in a way Claire had never heard before. "I'm saying that file has never left my office. And I am saying that I don't understand how anyone outside of this building could have a copy of what's inside it. And I am saying that I need to see those documents myself before I say anything else. Because if I'm right about what I think I'm right about, then—" She stopped. "Then what?" Claire said. "Then this case is a lot more compromised than either of us knew," Megan said. "And someone went to lengths I did not think anyone would go to." She hung up. She sat at her desk for 30 seconds without moving. Then she opened her bottom desk drawer, pulled out the physical case file for Claire Morgan versus Daniel Morgan, and laid it flat on her desk. She went through it page by page methodically, the way she did everything. Her own handwriting stared back at her on every page, the shorthand and margin notes and strategic thinking of a woman who had spent 8 years learning to build arguments from the inside out. She reached the section on custody timeline arguments. She stopped because there was a page missing, not torn, removed cleanly, carefully, the way someone removes a page when they don't want the absence to be noticed quickly. The preceding page and the following page were there. The content of the missing page was not. And Megan knew exactly what had been on that page because she had written it, and she had the kind of memory that was both the gift and the burden of people who think primarily in systems. It was her strategic outline for the hearing, the specific vulnerabilities she planned to address, the arguments she expected from the other side, her timeline for presenting evidence, the witnesses she was considering calling, and in what order. Everything the other side would need to build a perfect counter strategy. Everything they had apparently used. Megan Foster, who had not cried in a professional context in 6 years, put both hands flat on the desk and breathed very deliberately for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Sergeant Aldridge. Noah didn't know any of this yet. He was still in the parking lot of the Lucky Fork Diner, sitting on the hood of someone's pickup. That definitely wasn't his, with a statement form that Dylan had given him in case he thought of anything additional to add. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. He hadn't written anything else on the form because he'd already given everything he had, but he wasn't ready to leave. He wasn't sure why. Ray was nearby, leaning against his own bike, arms crossed, watching the police activity with the calm patience of a man who had sat through a lot of situations and knew that the ones worth sitting through usually took longer than you wanted them to. "You should probably go back to work," Ray said without looking at him. "Probably," Noah agreed. Neither of them moved. Bear came around from the far side of the lot. He had a coffee in each hand that he must have gotten from somewhere, and he handed one to Ray without being asked, the way people do when they've done something together long enough that the small gestures go on autopilot. He looked at Noah's empty hands. "You want one?" "I'm okay," Noah said. Bear shrugged and drank his own. "Attorney's coming," he said to Ray. "Heard the sergeant on the phone. Something about the documents. Something about her office." Ray's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Her office," he repeated. "That's what it sounded like." Noah looked between them. "What does that mean?" Ray uncrossed his arms, recrossed them. The closest thing to visible agitation Noah had seen from him yet. "It means the leak didn't come from someone watching Claire from the outside. It came from close to the legal process itself. Her attorney—" "No," Ray said immediately. "Don't assume that. Could be anything. Someone who had access to the attorney's office. Someone who knew the file location. Someone who had a reason to be inside that building and used the opportunity." He looked at Noah steadily. "Don't assume. Let the evidence build what it builds." Noah nodded. He understood the principle. It was the same thing his old shop teacher had told him about diagnosing engine trouble. Don't decide what's wrong before you've looked. Assumptions were the enemy of accuracy. But even without assuming, he could feel the shape of something. The surveillance, the log with per source written in it, the missing page from Megan's file, these things were not separate. They were the same things seen from different angles. Someone had been on both sides of this story at the same time. Someone had been standing close to Claire while pointing strangers toward her. Megan arrived at the diner parking lot at 5:17, which meant she had driven faster than she should have and probably hadn't stopped for red lights in any meaningful way. She was tall, mid-40s, with the kind of face that clearly showed she'd been beautiful before exhaustion and professional pressure had made her merely striking. She moved with purpose, the walk of someone who has already processed enough shock that they've come out the other side into action. She went to Sergeant Aldridge first. That was the right instinct, the legal procedural instinct. She identified herself, presented her bar card, and asked to see the documents from the smaller folder. Aldridge showed her what she could. Megan looked at the copies for exactly 45 seconds. Then she handed them back. Her face was very controlled, the kind of control that takes work. "That's my handwriting," she said. "Those are my notes, taken from a file that has been stored in a locked cabinet in my private office for the duration of this case." "Who else has access to your office?" Aldridge asked. "My paralegal, my assistant, the cleaning service on Tuesday nights." She paused. "And occasionally," she stopped. The pause was barely noticeable, but Noah, watching from across the lot, noticed it. "Occasionally client meetings take place in my office when the conference room is occupied." "Has Ms. Morgan been in your office?" "Yes, multiple times." "Has anyone accompanied her?" Megan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Once," she said. "About 6 weeks ago. She brought a friend, someone she said she trusted, who she wanted for emotional support during a particularly difficult session about custody timeline." She paused. "I stepped out for approximately 10 minutes to take an urgent call." She stopped. The air around that sentence was very loud. "The friend's name," Aldridge said. Megan said it quietly, like she didn't want to hear it herself. "Melissa Grant." "It took me." Nobody had been looking for Melissa Grant. That was the thing. Nobody had been looking for anyone specific yet. The investigation had been building toward an unknown aper source that was still a shape without a face. And then in one sentence, spoken by a woman who clearly already suspected what she was saying and found it difficult to say, the shape became a name. Aldridge wrote it down. Bear, who was standing close enough to hear, turned very slightly toward Ray. Ray's expression stayed perfectly still. Noah felt something sink in his chest. Not satisfaction. Nothing about this felt like satisfaction. Something more like the specific grief of a thing confirmed that you'd hoped wouldn't be confirmed. Someone in Claire's life. Someone she'd brought to a legal meeting for support. Someone who had sat in the attorney's office and waited for 10 minutes alone and used those 10 minutes. He looked at Claire. She was standing near her disabled car, close enough to have heard what Megan said, but not close enough to have heard the name. He could see from her posture that she was waiting. She was holding herself together with the precision of someone who has run out of reserves but refuses to fall apart in public. Aldridge went to her. Noah watched Claire's face during the next 40 seconds, and it was one of the hardest things he'd seen in recent memory. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was so specific. The moment Aldridge said the name, he could see it register in Claire's body like something physical. Her shoulders came in slightly, her hand went to her stomach, and then her chin came up. She said something to Aldridge. He couldn't hear it. Aldridge nodded and walked away. Claire stood alone for a moment. Then she looked up, found Noah across the lot, and walked directly toward him. He slid off the hood of the truck and stood up straight, the way you do when someone is coming toward you with intention. She stopped 2 feet from him. "Did you hear?" she asked. "I heard a name," he said carefully. "I don't know the person." "Melissa," Claire said. The word came out of her like something being extracted. "We've been friends for 9 years. 9 years." She looked at him with the eyes of someone trying to solve a problem they don't have the right tools for. "She threw me a baby shower when Eli was born. She was in the waiting room when I went into labor. She will come." She stopped. "She has been sitting across from me at my kitchen table for 9 years. Noah said nothing. There was nothing useful to say in that moment, and he'd learned young that saying useless things in bad moments was a way of making other people manage your discomfort instead of processing their own. So he stayed quiet and let Claire have the full weight of what she was feeling without offering her any exits from it. "I told her things," Claire said. Her voice had gone very low. "About the case, about my strategy, about what I was scared of, about..." She stopped. "About Eli, I told her things about Eli that I haven't told anyone else, because I thought..." She pressed her lips together. "I thought she was safe." "I'm sorry," Noah said. Simple, quiet, just that. Claire looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded a small, accepting nod that wasn't agreement with anything, just acknowledgement that she'd heard him. "Why would she do it?" she asked. Not really asking him, asking the air, asking whatever part of the universe had allowed this to happen. "We were friends, 9 years. Why would she..." "I don't know," Noah said, "but I think someone offered her something, and I think..." He hesitated. "I think whatever they offered her, she probably didn't understand what it would cost you." I wasn't sure why he said that. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't his forgiveness to offer. It wasn't even defense. It was just the thing that felt true to him in that moment. The thing his gut was telling him about a woman he'd never met based on nothing more than his own observation, that people rarely start out meaning to cause the exact damage they end up causing. Claire was quiet for a moment. "Then does that matter?" "To the law, no," Noah said. "To you, that's your call to make." She looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of respect, the kind that isn't warm yet, that's still too close to pain to be warm, but that recognizes something real. "You're 20, she said. "Yes, ma'am." "How do you know things like that?" He thought about it genuinely. "I don't know. I've seen a lot of things break. And usually by the time something breaks completely, it's been going wrong for a long time. And the person who made it start going wrong didn't always know that was what they were doing." She absorbed that. She didn't disagree. Melissa Grant's phone rang at 5:41 in the evening. She was sitting in her apartment, 12 miles from the Lucky Fork diner, eating dinner. She hadn't tasted watching television. She wasn't seeing living in the specific purgatory of a person who has done something they cannot undo and has been waiting without quite admitting they've been waiting for the moment when it caught up to them. The number on the screen was one she recognized, one she hadn't expected to see. She answered it anyway, because not answering it would be its own kind of answer, and she wasn't quite ready to give that answer yet. Melissa, Megan Foster said, and her voice was so careful and so controlled that it communicated everything. "We need to talk." Melissa's hand tightened around the phone. "Okay," she said. "I know about the file," Megan said, not accusing, just placing the fact in the open between them where it could be seen clearly. "I know about the folder the investigators were carrying. I know that some of what's in it could only have come from my office, and I know that you were in my office 6 weeks ago alone for approximately 10 minutes. Silence, the kind that admits things without speaking. "Melissa," Megan said, and for just a moment the professional control slipped. "Whatever they told you, whatever they promised you, you need to understand what this has done." Melissa's voice came out very small. "Is she okay?" No, Megan said, she is not okay. She is standing in a parking lot having found out today that someone she has trusted for 9 years has been helping build a case against her for custody of her child. A pause. Her 7-year-old son, Melissa. The sound on the other end of the phone was not quite crying. It was the sound immediately before crying, the specific, arrested breath of someone trying to hold something back that has already gotten past the gates. "They said," Melissa started, stopped. "They told me it was just information, just background. They said it wouldn't be used to hurt her, that it would just," she stopped again. "They said Daniel was worried about Eli. They said he just wanted to make sure Eli was in a stable environment. They said," "Melissa," Megan's voice cut through, not harsh but firm, "how much did they pay you?" A long silence. $8,000, Melissa said, barely audible. Megan closed her eyes. $8,000 for 9 years of friendship, for access to a woman's legal strategy, for photographs of a child, for per source written in a surveillance log, $8,000, which was apparently the price someone had calculated for what Claire Morgan's trust was worth on the open market. "They're going to find you," Megan said. "The police already have the investigators. They already have the documents. They already know someone close to Claire provided inside information. It is a matter of hours before your name is in the official record." She paused. "You can wait for that, or you can call me back in the next 20 minutes and we can talk about what comes next." She hung up and sat in the thick silence of her office with the missing page from her case file and the weight of all the things she was going to have to tell Claire that she didn't yet know. Noah was still in the parking lot when Ray came to stand beside him again. It had become their pattern, two people at the edge of events, watching, connected by the strange thread of a 48-minute parking lot observation that had pulled them both into something neither had planned to be part of. "You should go home," Ray said. "You keep saying that. You keep still being here." Noah looked at him. "Does it bother you?" Ray considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "No," he said. "I'm just observing. I don't want to leave until I know she's—" Noah stopped. He wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Until she's okay wasn't the right words, because okay was a long way away from where Claire currently was. Until she's safe was closer. Until she has what she needs to fight back was closer still. "She's not alone," Ray said quietly. "That's all you were ever going to be able to give her today." Noah thought about that. It was true. He hadn't solved anything. He hadn't fixed anything. He was a 20-year-old mechanic with a sandwich he'd never finished in a statement form with his careful observations printed on it. The legal case was the attorney's work. The investigation was the police's work. The betrayal and the healing from it were Claire's work and Melissa's work and nobody else's. What he'd done was notice and speak and stay. That was all. And Ray was telling him in the particular way Ray communicated things, direct, quiet, without decoration, that it had been enough. Bear's phone buzzed on. He looked at it. His expression changed. He showed it to Ray. Ray read whatever it said. His own expression shifted in a way Noah had not seen yet. Not exactly surprise, but the look of a man recalibrating the size of something he'd been measuring. "What?" Noah said. Ray looked at him. "The investigators," he said. "Aldridge ran the company, the one that hired them." He paused. "It's not a local outfit. It operates out of Chicago, and it's been connected to 3 other custody cases in 3 different states in the last 2 years. Noah stared at him. 3 other cases, Ray repeated. 3 other families. Same pattern each time. Long-term surveillance, inside source recruitment, strategic documentation designed to destabilize the primary caregiver rather than simply document them. Noah heard what that meant without needing it explained. This wasn't about Claire specifically, or rather Claire was specific, her situation was specific, her pain was specific. But the method wasn't. The method was a product, a designed, repeatable, scalable method for winning custody cases that had nothing to do with what was best for children and everything to do with what was best for whoever could afford to pay for it. 3 families, Noah said, that they know of, Bear said. The parking lot suddenly felt different, bigger. What had started as Noah noticing a parked car had opened a door into something that had been operating in the dark for years, targeting people who had already been made vulnerable by the worst circumstances of their private lives, and then systematically making them worse. Claire was not the beginning of this story. She might, however, be the part of it where someone finally looked up and saw the car. Megan's phone rang back in 19 minutes. It was Melissa. She was crying by the second sentence. Not the contained, managed crying of someone performing remorse, but the kind of crying that sounds like something breaking at the source, the specific grief of a person who has understood fully and finally what they have actually done. "I didn't know it was going to go this far," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't know. When Daniel's people first approached me, they made it sound, they said they were concerned. They said Claire had been making decisions that weren't good for Eli. They said they just needed someone on the inside to confirm things." She stopped, breathed. "They were very good at making it sound reasonable." "I know," Megan said, because she did know, because she had seen the methods before, not this specifically, but the architecture of manipulation. The way it dressed itself up in the language of concern and reasonability and the best interest of the child until you were doing things you would never have agreed to do if they'd been presented honestly from the start. "What did you give them?" Megan asked. "All of it. I need all of it," Melissa told her. It took 26 minutes. The information she had passed, Claire's schedule, her habits, her safe people, her vulnerabilities. Yes, the page from the file cabinet during those 10 minutes in Megan's office had been gathered over 4 months. Not all at once, in pieces, small enough each time that each single piece felt like almost nothing. That was the design. Each piece was almost nothing. Together, they were the complete map of someone's life delivered to people whose job was to weaponize it. "There's more," Melissa said, and her voice had changed again. Gone quieter, more deliberate, like someone who has decided that the only thing left to do with a terrible decision is tell the entire truth about it. "They sent me documents, instructions, emails. I have all of them." Megan sat up straighter. "I kept everything," Melissa said. "I don't know why I kept everything. I think I knew this day was coming. I think I kept it because some part of me knew that when it did having, it would be the only thing I could offer." "Melissa," Megan said carefully, "I am not your attorney. I cannot give you legal advice, and you are going to need your own attorney before you do anything else. But speaking to you right now simply as a person," she paused, "what you have in those documents could change the entire outcome of Claire's case, and it could expose an operation that has hurt at least 3 other families. And it could," she stopped, "it could be the thing you do that matters, even after the thing you did that didn't." Silence. "I'll send you everything tonight," Melissa said. She hung up. Megan sat with the phone in her hand and stared at the case file on her desk. The missing page suddenly felt less like damage and more like the loose thread that, when pulled, had started to unravel something much larger than one custody case in northern Ohio. She picked up her phone again and called Sergeant Aldridge. "I have a cooperating witness," she said, "and she has documentation that goes well beyond what we've already found." Aldridge was quiet for one beat. "Then I'll come to you." At the Lucky Fork Diner parking lot, Claire Morgan finally got her car jumped by a kind stranger in a pickup truck who'd overheard the situation and offered without being asked. The engine turned over. The battery light flickered and held. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the door open and her feet still on the pavement. Ray walked over. He crouched down to her eye level, the specific posture of someone who doesn't want to loom, and said something Noah couldn't hear. Claire nodded. Ray stood back up, said something else. Claire almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She looked across the roof of her car to where Noah was standing. "I'm going to go get my son," she said. "Good," Noah said. "It's past 4. He's been at aftercare for 2 hours. He's going to be hungry and annoyed." "Kids usually are," Noah said. He's going to ask me why I'm late, and I'm going to have to figure out something to say that isn't. She stopped, gestured vaguely at the police cruisers. The statement forms the entire afternoon. All of this. Tell him something came up, Noah said. Tell him you had to take care of something important. And if he asks what, Noah thought about it. Tell him sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up when someone needs you, even when it's not your job. Claire looked at him for a long moment. You're 20, she said again. Yes, ma'am. She got in the car. The engine held. She drove out of the lot toward the school, toward her son, toward the ice cream that was late, but was still coming toward the hearing. That was 3 weeks away and was about to be fought on completely different terms than anyone had planned. Noah watched the silver Honda until it turned onto the main road and disappeared. Then he turned back to the lot. Ray was watching him. Now, Noah said. Now, Ray said, we find out what the evidence is going to say. And somewhere 12 miles away, Melissa Grant was opening her laptop and beginning to forward one by one every email, every instruction, every payment, receipt, every document from 4 months of choices she could not undo, offering up the complete architecture of what had been done to her best friend, piece by piece, the way it had originally been taken apart. The truth, as Ray had said, didn't need help. It just needed room. And tonight it was finally getting it. The email started arriving in Megan Foster's inbox at 7:43 in the evening. She was still at her desk. She hadn't eaten. She had drunk 3 cups of coffee that she couldn't really taste anymore and had been sitting with her phone in one hand and her case file in the other, waiting for the sound that meant Melissa had followed through on what she'd promised. The first email came in with an attachment, then another, then another. They kept coming one every few minutes, like Melissa was going through a folder she'd organized and sending them in order, deliberately, methodically, the way a person does something when they've decided to do it completely rather than halfway. Megan opened the first one. It was an email chain between Melissa and a man named Carter Blaine, who identified himself as a senior consultant at a firm called Meridian Strategic Partners based in Chicago. The language was professional, careful, the kind of careful that understood it was creating a record and tried to make that record look clean. But underneath the careful language, the structure of what was being asked was unmistakable. They wanted schedules. They wanted habits. They wanted to know who Claire trusted, who she confided in when she was most vulnerable, when she was most likely to make decisions that could later be characterized as impulsive or unstable. Megan read it twice. Then she opened the second attachment. This one was different. It was a document, not an email, but a formal internal memo, the kind that gets written when an organization wants to record its own strategy for purposes of internal review. The header said Meridian Strategic Partners. The subject line said Morgan Custody Matter Phase 2 Implementation. Megan read the first paragraph. Then she stopped. She set down her coffee. She read it again. The memo wasn't about documenting Claire's life. It was about engineering it. There was a specific section, 3 paragraphs, clinical in their language, precise in their goals, that outlined what the firm called destabilization methodology. The goal was not to find evidence of genuine instability in Claire Morgan's behavior. The goal was to create conditions under which a stable person would begin to behave in ways that could be documented and presented as instability. The surveillance wasn't just watching. It was designed to make Claire feel watched, to make her anxious, to disrupt her sleep, to make her hypervigilant in ways that could be photographed and logged, to isolate her from support systems, to create a version of Claire Morgan that didn't exist and then photograph that version and present it to a judge as the real one. 4 months of it. Megan sat back in her chair and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel in a professional context. A slow rising fury that had nothing to do with winning a case and everything to do with what it meant that someone had built a business model around doing this to people. She picked up her phone and called Aldridge. I need you to see something tonight, she said. Not tomorrow, tonight. Aldridge arrived in 40 minutes. Noah didn't sleep well. He was back at the repair shop the next morning at 7, same as always, and he worked the way he always worked, methodically, thoroughly noticing things. But the rhythm of it felt different. The ordinary texture of a Tuesday had changed somehow, the way a room changes after you've moved a piece of furniture that's been there for years. Everything was in its right place. The proportions were just slightly off. His co-worker, a man named Jim, who was in his 40s and had the specific incuriosity of someone who had decided long ago that other people's business was a form of bad weather best avoided, noticed that Noah was quiet. "You all right?" Jim asked, not looking up from the engine he was working on. "Yeah," Noah said. "You're quieter than usual." "I'm always quiet." "You're quieter than that." Noah thought about how to explain yesterday afternoon in terms that would fit into the ordinary Tuesday morning of a small repair shop. He decided it probably couldn't be done. "Something happened yesterday," he said. "Nothing that happened to me specifically. I saw something. And then a lot of other things happened because of it." Jim looked up now, studied Noah for a moment with the eyes of a man who had seen enough of the world to know when someone was carrying something real. "Somebody get hurt?" he asked. "No," Noah said. "That's the no. Nobody got hurt. Somebody almost did, maybe, or things might have gotten a lot worse." He paused. "I don't know if what I did actually changed anything. I won't know for a while." Jim went back to his engine. "That's usually how it is," he said. "You do the thing. You don't always find out if it mattered." "Does that bother you?" Noah asked. Jim shrugged. "Matters less whether it bothers you and more whether you did it anyway." Noah thought about that for the rest of the morning. Megan Foster spent that same morning in a conference room with Sergeant Aldridge, a detective named Hess who had been pulled in from the county, and an assistant district attorney named Patricia Cowan, who had driven 45 minutes at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and an expression that said she'd been briefed on the basics and was both alarmed and interested. Megan laid out the documents on the table in order. The surveillance logs, the per-source entries, the payment records from Melissa, the Meridian Strategic Partners memo, the emails between Melissa and Carter Blaine, the photographs from the folder, the timeline of the custody case alongside the timeline of the surveillance. Patricia Cowan read the destabilization memo twice the same way Megan had, and then set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "They put it in writing," she said. "They put everything in writing," Megan said, "because internally they needed documentation of their methodology. They thought it was protected. They thought the only copies were in their own secure system. Melissa had access to their communications." "Carter Blaine was sloppy," Megan said. "He treated Melissa as an extension of the operation rather than an outside contractor. He forwarded internal documents to her when she asked questions. He included her on strategy emails that should have stayed in-house." She paused. "He probably assumed she was too compromised to ever share them, that the money made her loyal." "He was wrong," Aldridge said. "He was wrong," Megan agreed. Cowan tapped the destabilization memo with one finger. "This isn't just irregular. This is actionable. If this methodology was applied systematically, if Meridian Strategic has been using this in multiple cases." 3 confirmed cases in other states, Aldridge said. "We've been in contact with law enforcement in those jurisdictions since last night. 2 of them had open investigations that had stalled. The documentation from Melissa's files connects to both." Cowan looked at the table, at the spread of papers that represented 4 months of deliberate, calculated harm directed at one woman, her child, and her legal process. At the evidence that it had happened to at least 2 other families in at least 2 other states. "The custody hearing," she said to Megan. "When is it?" 17 days. "Can you move it up?" Megan had already thought about this. "I've filed a motion this morning. Emergency review based on discovery of fraudulent interference with legal process. The court will decide today whether to grant it." Cowan nodded. Then she looked at Aldridge. "What about the investigators?" "Both charged," Aldridge said. "Released on bond pending investigation. Their attorney is already talking to us about cooperation. They're not the people with the most exposure in this situation, and they know it." "Meridian, we're building the federal angle," Aldridge said. "Cross-state operation targeting family court proceedings. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago was notified this morning." The room was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of nothing, the silence of several people absorbing the full size of something that had started 24 hours ago as a 20-year-old mechanic noticing a parked car. "One more thing," Megan said. She pulled a single sheet from the bottom of her stack and placed it on the table. "This was in the documents Melissa sent. I almost missed it because it was buried in a file labeled administrative." Everyone leaned forward. It was a client authorization form with Daniel Morgan's signature on it, dated 4 months ago, authorizing Meridian Strategic Partners to conduct what the form called comprehensive case support services for the Morgan custody matter, and hadn't just known about the operation. He had signed the paperwork that started it. 17 days felt like both too long and too short. For Claire, it felt like standing on a runway while a plane was being repaired. The destination was fixed, the need was urgent, and all she could do was wait and trust that the people working on the machinery knew what they were doing. She went back to work. She picked up Eli every afternoon. She made dinner and helped with homework and did the bedtime routine. That was the most reliable structure in her life, the bath, the story. The particular argument about whether the light in the hallway needed to stay on, it always did. She always pretended to consider turning it off. They both knew the outcome before the conversation started. She kept her eye on because Eli needed it to run. Because a 7-year-old's world is made of routines, and the adults who love him are supposed to be the frame that holds those routines in place, even when the adults themselves are quietly falling apart and then quietly putting themselves back together. She called Noah 3 days after the diner parking lot. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "How are you?" She thought about the honest answer to that for a moment. "Complicated," she said, "but moving." That's something. Megan says the motion was granted. The hearings have been moved up to 10 days from now. "Good," and he said. "She says the documentation from Melissa changes basically everything. The strategy they had built to use against me. It doesn't work anymore when the judge knows it was manufactured." "Yeah," he said. A pause, not uncomfortable, the kind of pause between people who have been through something together and don't need to fill every silence with words. "I wanted to say something to you," Claire said. "I tried to say it in the parking lot, and I don't think I said it right." "You said it fine," Noah said. "No, I said thank you, and that wasn't—" She stopped. Tried again. "You didn't know me. I was a stranger." "You had no reason to stay for 4 hours in a parking lot giving statements and—" "48 minutes, he said. The parking lot part was only 48 minutes. The statement part came after." She laughed. It surprised her the laugh it came out before she could decide whether to let it. It was small and short and genuine, and it was the first real one in longer than she could remember. "The point is," she said, steadying herself, "what you did wasn't nothing. I know everyone keeps saying you just noticed a car. But you," she paused, "you saw me, and I need you to know that that mattered, because for a very long time, I had been invisible in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. And then one afternoon, a stranger looked at me and actually saw what was happening." Noah was quiet on the other end. Then, "I'm glad I didn't talk myself out of it." "How close did you come?" He laughed a little. "Closer than I'd like to admit." "What made you do it anyway?" He thought about it genuinely. "The kid," he said finally. "You came outside with a to-go bag and you looked at your phone and you had this—" He paused. "You just looked like someone who was trying really hard to hold a lot of things together. And when I understood that those people in that car were tracking you, I thought about whatever was at the center of all that effort you were making, and it turned out to be a 7-year-old. Claire's throat tightened. "His name is Eli," she said. "I know," Noah said. "You told me." "He wants to meet you," she said. "He knows what happened, as much of it as a 7-year-old can know, and he has opinions about it." "What kind of opinions?" "Mostly he wants to know if you're friends with the motorcycle guys." Noah laughed, a real one, full and warm. "Something like that," he said. "Can I bring him by sometime to the shop?" "Yeah," Noah said. "Absolutely." The morning of the hearing arrived the way important mornings always do, looking almost exactly like an ordinary morning, until the weight of it settled into your chest when you woke up and reminded you that today was not ordinary at all. Claire was ready before she needed to be. She sat in her kitchen with Eli eating cereal across from her, his feet swinging the specific way. His feet always swung when he was eating something he liked, and she watched him, the way she'd been watching him since he was born, with the particular ferocity of a person who understands that the person in front of them is not just a person, but is also the center of their entire universe. "Mom," Eli said. "Yeah, buddy." "Are you nervous?" She considered lying. She always considered lying to him and almost never did, because he had the specific 7-year-old's ability to detect adult dishonesty the way dogs detect strangers. Not in any particular detail, just in a general wrongness that made him uneasy. "Yeah," she said, "a little." He nodded, processing this. "Noah said that being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right." She looked at him. When did you talk to Noah? When we went to the shop. He said it simply as though this were an established fact about the world. I asked him if the motorcycle guys were scared, and he said everybody gets scared. And I asked why they helped anyway, and he said because being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. Claire sat with that for a moment. He's right, she said. I know, Eli said with the unambiguous certainty of a child who has decided someone is worth listening to. Can we go see him after today? The shop smells like oil and it's kind of gross, but he showed me how an engine works. We'll see, she said. That means yes. That means we'll see. He went back to his cereal feet, still swinging. Claire picked up her coffee and held it in both hands and looked at her son and understood in the full and specific way she sometimes did in quiet moments that every difficult thing she had ever done had been worth doing because it had gotten her to this kitchen table with this small, swinging-footed person who quoted 20-year-old mechanics back at her over breakfast. The courthouse was not dramatic. That was always the truth about important things they happened in ordinary rooms. The courtroom was the kind that exists in every county, in every state in this country. Functional, slightly worn smelling of paper and years of difficult conversations. The fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly tired. The judge's bench that was elevated just enough to communicate authority without quite managing to be impressive. Judge Renata Okafor had been on the family court bench for 11 years. She had the particular quality that experience in family court builds a deep, unflinching understanding of what was at stake in every case before her, paired with an equally deep commitment to not letting that understanding make her lose her professional equilibrium. She had seen people at their worst and their most desperate. She had seen children used as leverage. She had seen love weaponized. She had developed, over 11 years, an almost perfect sensor for when someone was telling the truth about what they wanted and when they were performing it. She had read the pre-hearing submissions over the weekend. When she entered the courtroom on the morning of the hearing, her face gave nothing away. But the efficiency of her the pace, the posture, the immediate call to order communicated that she was not approaching this as a routine matter. Before we begin, Judge Okafor said, I want to address the supplemental motions filed by Petitioner's Counsel and the responding documentation from the County District Attorney's Office. She looked at Megan, then at the attorney for Daniel's side, a man named Franklin Greer, who had the expensive, confident air of someone who charged a great deal for his services and usually delivered. Mr. Greer, your client, was given the opportunity to respond to these filings. His response was that the surveillance was lawfully conducted. Greer stood. That is correct, Your Honor. Private surveillance in public spaces is, I'm familiar with the law, Mr. Greer, Judge Okafor said, not unkindly, just precisely. My question is not about the legality of the surveillance itself. My question is about the document in evidence marked Exhibit 7. A pause in the room. Greer adjusted his posture. The Meridian document. The Meridian Strategic Partners internal memo, Judge Okafor said, which outlines a strategy described as destabilization methodology. A strategy which, according to the memo itself, is designed not to document existing behavior, but to engineer circumstances calculated to produce behavior that can then be documented and presented as evidence of instability. She let that sit for a moment. Your client authorized Meridian Strategic Partners services 4 months ago. Are you telling this court he was unaware of their methods? The silence in the courtroom had a particular quality. It was the silence of a strategy that had been perfectly constructed for a different fight and had just encountered a fight it was not built for. Greer said, my client engaged what he believed was a standard investigative service. The memo, Mr. Greer, Judge Okafor said. Exhibit 7, did your client read the contract? Another pause. Clients are not always presented with internal operational documents. That is not an answer to my question. Greer stopped. He had been an attorney for 22 years. He knew the difference between a judge asking questions and a judge telling you something with questions. This was the second kind. He sat down, not dramatically, just quietly, the specific gesture of a man recalibrating in real time. Megan presented the evidence in the order she'd planned since the night Melissa's emails had started arriving. She was precise. She was controlled. She let the documents carry the weight rather than her voice because that was what good attorneys understood. The evidence that speaks for itself is always more powerful than the attorney who speaks for it. Noah's statement was entered as Exhibit 3. She read from it without editorializing. The wheel angle, the engine, the timing of the movement inside the vehicle relative to Claire's appearances outside the diner. 48 minutes of observation documented with the specificity of a person whose professional training had taught him to notice what other people ignored. Judge Okafor read it herself. She looked up once briefly in the middle of it with an expression that was too controlled to read precisely but was clearly not neutral. The surveillance logs went in as Exhibit 4, the payment records as Exhibit 5, Carter Blaine's emails to Melissa as Exhibit 6, the destabilization memo as Exhibit 7, the client authorization form with Daniel's signature as Exhibit 8. Each exhibit landed in the room with the specific weight of something that cannot be unsaid. Then Megan said, "Your Honor, I would like to call Melissa Grant." Franklin Greer did not object, which was itself a statement about the position he found himself in. Melissa walked to the stand. She was not composed in the way Claire was composed. She was the opposite, raw in a way that was both painful to watch and somehow more honest for it. Her hands were folded in her lap and she kept her eyes forward with the deliberate effort of someone who is afraid to look at the person they have hurt. Megan was precise and not unkind. She asked Melissa to confirm her relationship with Claire. Melissa confirmed it. 9 years. Close friends. Confidence. She asked Melissa to confirm her contact with Carter Blaine. Melissa confirmed it. The initial approach. The payments. The information she'd provided. She asked Melissa to confirm the circumstances of the 10 minutes alone in Megan's office. Melissa's voice was very steady. Steadier than the rest of her. "I took a photograph of the document with my phone," she said, "and I sent it to Carter Blaine." She paused. "I knew it was wrong when I did it. I knew it immediately. But I told myself it was just one thing, that she wouldn't." She stopped, breathed. "I was wrong." Judge Okafor asked, "Ms. Grant, why are you here today?" Melissa looked at the judge directly for the first time. "Because Claire is a good mother," she said. "She is a better mother than I have words for. And because Eli is," she stopped. "Because Eli deserves to grow up knowing his mother fought for him and won. And because the only thing left that I can do that matters is tell the truth about what I helped happen. Even though it means," she paused, "even though it costs me." The courtroom was very quiet. Claire in the gallery was looking at her hands. She had been looking at her hands since Melissa started speaking, and her shoulders were very still in the way of someone using every available resource to hold a single position. Judge Okafor thanked Melissa and asked her to step down. Then she looked at both tables. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," she said. In the hallway during the recess, Ray was leaning against the wall beside Bear and two other riders who had come, not because anyone asked them to, not because they had a role in the proceedings, but because that was apparently what they did. They showed up. They stood. They made the silent statement that someone was not alone. Noah was there too. He'd come because Megan had called him the night before and told him his statement was being used and asked if he wanted to be present. He'd said yes before she finished the sentence. He was standing near Ray in the familiar position of slightly outside the inner circle, but clearly part of what the circle was protecting. Claire came out of the courtroom and stopped in front of Ray. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the riders, at Bear, at all of them. "You didn't have to come," she said. Ray shrugged. "We were in the area." Bear nodded seriously. "We're often in the area of things." Claire almost laughed. The tears that had been threatening since Melissa stepped off the witness stand decided to make their move now. At this moment in this hallway in front of a group of Hell's Angels leaning against a courthouse wall, she didn't fight them. She just let them come, and they came fast, and then they stopped, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand without any apparent embarrassment. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "I need you to know, all of you, that this is the first time in 4 months I have felt like myself, like I'm actually standing in my own life instead of watching someone else take it apart." Nobody said anything immediately. Then Ray said quietly, "You were always standing in it. You just needed someone to stand with you." Claire looked at Noah. He looked back. "How's Eli?" he asked. "He's with my neighbor," she said. "He made me promise to tell him everything." "Tell him the good part first," Noah said. "What's the good part?" He thought about it for a second. That his mom didn't give up. Claire held his gaze for a moment that was longer than a moment. Then the door to the courtroom opened, and the bailiff indicated that Judge Okafor was returning. The judge's ruling came 40 minutes later. She spoke for a long time in the careful, measured language of someone who understands that their words are going into a record that will matter beyond this room. She addressed the surveillance. She addressed the destabilization memo. She addressed the attorney-client privilege violation. She addressed the authorization form with Daniel's signature. And then she said the specific sentences that Megan had been building toward for the last 17 days, the sentences that acknowledged that the existing custody arrangement had been constructed on a foundation of manufactured evidence, and that the welfare of one, Elijah Morgan, age 7, required immediate protective measures while the broader investigation proceeded, temporary primary custody to Claire, supervised visitation for Daniel pending the outcome of the criminal and civil proceedings, and a referral of the complete Meridian strategic partners matter to the appropriate state and federal authorities. Franklin Greer did not respond dramatically. He made a note on his legal pad. He probably already knew what was coming and had been preparing for it. That was the thing about good attorneys. They knew when a case had turned, and they started managing the descent before it became a crash. Daniel Morgan, sitting beside him, did not take it as quietly. He said something too low for the gallery to hear, and Greer put a hand on his arm and said something back, and whatever Greer said was apparently effective because Daniel went still. But his face in the moment before he controlled it carried the specific expression of a man who had believed his money made things predictable and had just discovered that some things are not for sale. Claire sat very still at her table. Megan leaned over and said something in her ear. Claire nodded once. Then she turned and looked at the gallery, at Ray at Bear, at the riders at Noah, and she held the look for a long moment, and she didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that the look didn't already carry. Noah looked back. He thought about Jim at the repair shop and what he'd said, that you do the thing and you don't always find out if it mattered. He found out today. It had mattered. It had mattered in the way of 48 minutes of watching a parked car, in the way of wheels turned toward an exit, in the way of saying something to a stranger because being wrong seemed better than doing nothing and being right. It had mattered in the way of one small kid who counted on ice cream on Thursdays and whose world was about to get a little bit more certain. Megan collected her documents with the brisk efficiency of a person who has work to do and knows it. She had 3 more phone calls to make, 2 motions to file in connection with the Meridian investigation, and a client to debrief in the hallway when everything cleared out. But first she walked to the gallery and stopped in front of Noah. She held out her hand. He shook it. Your statement, she said, was the cleanest piece of observational testimony I have introduced in 11 years of practice. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, I just wrote down what I saw. I know, she said. That's why it was clean. She moved on. Ray looked at Noah. Come on, he said. We'll get something to eat. Is the diner okay? Noah said. Bear started laughing, a genuine deep laugh that filled the courthouse hallway. Maybe not that diner, Ray said. Fair enough, Noah said. They walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon 12 riders, 1 young mechanic, 1 attorney on her phone, and somewhere across town a 7-year-old boy, waiting to hear whether today was going to be the kind of day his mother had been fighting for. It was. It was exactly that kind of day. Claire picked up Eli at 4:17 that afternoon. I was sitting on the front steps of her neighbor Sandra's house with his backpack in his lap and his shoes untied, the way his shoes were almost always untied at the end of the day, as if the energy required to maintain tied shoes simply exceeded what a 7-year-old was willing to budget for. He looked up when he heard her car and read her face the way children read their parents' faces, not in words, not in analysis, but in something faster and more direct than either of those things. He stood up. Mom, he said. Hey, buddy. He looked at her for one more second, making sure of what he was seeing. Then he walked down the steps and put his arms around her waist and held on with the particular grip of a child who understands on some level below language that holding on is sometimes the most important thing a person can do. Claire pressed her hand to the back of his head and closed her eyes. She had promised herself she would not cry again today. She had used up what she'd been willing to use in the courthouse hallway in front of Ray and Bear and a group of motorcycle riders who had somehow become the most unexpected support system she'd ever had. She was done crying for today. She cried anyway, just a little, just enough, into the top of Eli's hair where he couldn't quite see it. Good day, he asked, muffled against her jacket. Really good day, she said. He pulled back and looked at her face with the critical examination of someone checking their work. "Your eyes are red." "When?" she said. He gave her the look of a 7-year-old who has heard better excuses. "Can we go see Noah?" he asked. She laughed. "Not today. Today we're going to go home, and I'm going to make dinner, and you're going to tell me about your day." He considered the trade-off. "Can we have ice cream after?" "It's Thursday," she said. He nodded like this settled something important. Then yes. She buckled him in and drove, and the evening opened up in front of them the way evenings do when the worst part of a long stretch is finally behind you. Ordinary and quiet and full of small things that suddenly feel like gifts. 3 days after the hearing, Carter Blaine of Meridian Strategic Partners was contacted by federal investigators. He had spent those 3 days, according to people who knew him, in a state of controlled damage management, calling attorneys, reviewing documents, constructing the version of events that would serve him best. He was the kind of man who believed that preparation was the same as control, and that control was always available to the person willing to pay enough for it. He had not anticipated Melissa. He had calculated that Melissa was too compromised to cooperate, that the money she'd taken and the role she'd played would make her a liability to any investigation rather than an asset. He made her complicit by design, the way the operation was designed to make everyone it touched, complicit by design so that the architecture of shared culpability kept the whole structure standing. I had not anticipated that Melissa would decide the cost of silence was higher than the cost of truth. The federal investigator who sat across from Carter Blaine in a Chicago conference room on a Tuesday morning is a woman named Agent Sandra Reyes, and she had spent 15 years working financial crimes and fraud cases before moving to a unit that handled, among other things, organized interference with civil court proceedings. She put the Meridian memo on the table between them without preamble. "We found your methodology document," she said. Blaine looked at it. His attorney sitting beside him put a hand on the table in the specific gesture of someone trying to slow down an oncoming thing. "We've also found your financial records," Reyes continued. 18 months of client engagements, 14 family court cases across 7 states. 3 of those states have already opened investigations. She paused. "The question in front of you right now is not whether this is happening. The question is where you want to stand when it does." Blaine said nothing. His attorney leaned over and said something very quietly in his ear. Whatever it was, Blaine heard it and nodded slowly, the particular nod of a man absorbing a reality he had not expected to have to absorb. Reyes waited. She was good at waiting. 14 cases, 14 families, 14 sets of children whose lives had been treated as collateral in a strategy designed to extract maximum advantage for whoever could afford to pay for it. She had read every file over the weekend. She had not slept much, not because she couldn't sleep, but because she'd chosen not to spend those hours with the files, instead, with the names and the children and the manufactured evidence. Because she believed that the people who were going to answer for a thing should be held accountable by someone who fully understood what the thing was. Blaine's attorney said, "My client would like to discuss the terms of cooperation." Reyes looked at Blaine directly. "He'll have that opportunity," she said. "But I want to be clear about something before we begin." She tapped the memo. "This document uses the phrase destabilization methodology. Your client didn't stumble into a bad approach. He designed one. He wrote it down, refined it, trained staff on it, and sold it as a premium service." She paused. "That distinction is going to matter." Blaine met her eyes for the first time in the conversation. Something moved across his face, not remorse, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The specific discomfort of a person who has heard their work described accurately and found the description uncomfortable. 14 families, Reyes said simply. Blaine looked at the table. Megan Foster heard about the federal cooperation 2 weeks after the hearing through the specific grapevine of attorneys and investigators that forms around cases with expanding implications. She was sitting at her desk, the same cold coffee, the same particular quality of late afternoon light, when her phone buzzed with the news. She sat with it for a moment. Then she did something she almost never did at her desk. She closed her eyes and she stayed very still, and she allowed herself 30 seconds of simple, uncomplicated relief. Then she picked up her phone and called Claire. "It's moving forward," she said when Claire answered. "Federally, 14 cases." A pause on Claire's end. 14, Claire said. 14 that they have confirmed, possibly more. Another pause longer. Those people, Claire said slowly, those other families, they went through the same thing, the same watching the same. She stopped. Do they know that this is investigators are reaching out to them, Megan said. Some of them had outcomes that can potentially be revisited. Some of them, she paused, some of them may have lost cases they should have won. The weight of that moved through the phone line like something physical. Because of the same thing that almost happened to me, Claire said. Yes, silence. Megan, Claire said quietly, I want to do something. I don't know exactly what. But I can't just have gotten through this and not do something with it. Megan understood immediately, because it was the thing that happened to people who survived the specific kind of ordeal Claire had survived, the understanding that what you went through was not just yours, that the path you fought your way through was also the path the next person would have to fight through unless someone built something different. Let's talk about that, Megan said. When you're ready. I'm ready now, Claire said. Megan smiled, the first real uncomplicated smile she'd managed in weeks. I know, she said. I know you are. Noah had been at the new shop for 2 weeks when Eli came to visit. It had happened the way Ray had said it would, not dramatically, not as a reward or a ceremony, just as the natural next thing. Ray had introduced him to Caleb Turner on the Saturday after the hearing, at the kind of meeting that doesn't announce itself as important, but clearly is. Caleb was in his late 50s, built like someone who had spent his entire life with his hands inside machines, with the specific quality of attention that Noah recognized immediately as his own, the kind that noticed things other people walk past. Caleb had watched Noah work for 40 minutes without saying much. Then he'd offered him the position the way people offer things when they're not trying to sell you on it, simply directly take it or leave it. I notice you notice things, Caleb had said. People keep telling me that, Noah said. Good people or bad people. Noah thought about it. Both lately. Caleb nodded like this was an acceptable answer. I pay fair. I expect the same in return. You see something wrong, you say something. You're not sure, you still say something. That's the only rule that matters. Noah had said yes before Caleb finished the sentence. I was 3 weeks into it when Claire called and asked if she could bring Eli by. Noah said yes, same as before. And on a Saturday afternoon that was warm enough to have the shop doors open. Claire pulled up in the silver Honda Battery, replaced running perfectly now, and Eli got out before the car had quite stopped moving the way 7-year-olds do when they have decided that the moment they're about to enter deserves their immediate presence. He looked at the shop with the wide-eyed, slightly overwhelmed expression of a child encountering something that smells powerful and looks complicated and is therefore immediately fascinating. He looked at Noah. You work here now, he said. I work here now, Noah confirmed. It's better than the other place. How do you know about the other place? Mom told me. Eli said it simply the way children relay information with no understanding of its sensitivity. She said you used to work somewhere that didn't notice how good you were. Noah looked at Claire. She shrugged, unapologetic. That's pretty accurate, Noah said. Eli walked into the shop with the authority of someone who had decided he belonged there, and Caleb, who was working on a transmission in the back, looked up and assessed the situation in about 2 seconds and clearly decided it was fine. This the kid, he called to Noah. This is Eli, Noah said. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and came over and shook Eli's hand with the serious adult-to-adult gravity that children respond to better than anything else. You interested in engines? Caleb asked. I don't know yet, Eli said honestly. Fair answer, Caleb said. Most people who end up loving them didn't know yet at first. Eli considered this. What made you love them? Caleb looked at him for a moment, then at Noah, then back at the boy. They don't lie, he said. An engine has a problem, it tells you. You just have to learn to listen. Eli thought about that with the visible concentration of someone filing something important. People should be more like that, he said. Caleb looked at Noah again. This time the look said something specific. Yeah, Caleb said, they should. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived 6 weeks after the hearing on an ordinary Wednesday in the form of a phone call to Sergeant Aldridge from an attorney in Columbus. Her name was Janet Morse, and she represented a woman named Patricia Hale who lived in Columbus, Ohio, and who had lost a custody case 14 months ago, following what she had described at the time as systematic harassment and psychological pressure that her own attorney had told her was probably stress-related. Patricia Hale had read a brief news item about the Meridian Strategic Partners investigation. A single paragraph in a local paper buried in a section most people skipped. She had read it 3 times. Then she had called Janet Morse, who had looked up the case, and then called Aldridge, and then said the sentence that made Aldridge sit very still in her chair. The lead investigator on the Hale surveillance, Janet Morse said, was the same person who ran the Morgan surveillance, same firm, same methods, and we have reason to believe the outcome in the Hale case was directly influenced by manufactured documentation. Aldridge pulled up the Hale case. She read it in 45 minutes. Then she called Megan Foster. "Patricia Hale," she said. "Megan already had her files open. I've been expecting this call. You knew about her. I suspected there were others when the federal investigation identified 14 cases. I started looking 2 weeks ago." Megan paused. "The Hale case is the clearest, but there are at least 2 others in Ohio alone where the pattern matches closely enough that an appeal is worth pursuing." "Can the outcomes be changed?" Aldridge asked. "Custody modifications based on fraud are revisable," Megan said. "It's not simple, it's not fast, but it's possible." She paused. "It's possible because of what happened in the Lucky Fork Diner parking lot, because we have documentation now, because Melissa gave us the architecture." Aldridge absorbed this. "How many kids?" she said quietly. Megan was quiet for a moment. "In the cases we've confirmed 11 children, 11 kids whose living situations were decided at least in part by manufactured evidence." Aldridge put the phone down on her desk for a second. Just a second. Then she picked it back up. "What do you need?" she asked. "I need the federal case to move fast," Megan said. "And I need Blaine's cooperation to be as complete as he's promised. I'll make some calls." "One more thing," Megan said. "Noah Bennett's statement. I want to use it again. In the Hale appeal and potentially in the others. His documentation of the surveillance methodology, the specific observation of operational behavior, is going to be the foundation of the argument that the method itself is the evidence, not just its application in Claire's case." Aldridge thought about a 20-year-old mechanic sitting outside a diner with a sandwich he never finished watching the wheel angle on a parked car. "Does he know?" she asked. "Not yet," Megan said. "I'm going to call him today." Noah was under a truck when his phone rang. He pulled himself out, checked the screen, saw Megan's name, and answered with the specific wariness of someone who has learned that calls from attorneys in the middle of the workday carry weight. "Noah," Megan said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to ask you something." "Okay," he said. She told him about Patricia Hale, about the 2 other Ohio cases, about the 11 children, about the appeal and the federal timeline, and what his statement meant in the larger architecture of all of it. He listened the way he listened to everything completely, without interrupting, filing it in the order it arrived. When she finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" "Permission to use your statement in the appeals," she said, "and potentially a deposition further down the line, explaining your observations, your background, how you came to notice what you noticed." "Yeah," he said immediately, "whatever you need." "It might take time," she said. "This isn't going to resolve in a few weeks. These appeals are going to take months. Maybe longer." "I know," he said. "You're 20 years old," she said. "You have your own life too." "Megan," he said, and something in his voice was so steady and so clear that she stopped. 11 kids. You said 11 kids." "Yes." "Then yes," he said, "whatever you need, for as long as it takes." A pause. "You know," Megan said, and her voice had shifted into the register of something real, something beneath the professional. "When I started as an attorney, I used to believe that cases were won by whoever had the best legal strategy. And then I started working family court, and I learned that cases are won by whoever has the most truth on their side. And I spent years thinking that was naive." She paused. "I don't think it's naive anymore." "Because of a parking lot," Noah said. "Because of a parking lot," she said. He laughed quietly. "I just noticed a car." "Noah," said, and her voice was very direct now. "You built a case from wheel angle and engine behavior that is now the evidentiary foundation for a federal investigation into a multi-state fraud operation targeting vulnerable families." She paused. "You did not just notice a car." He was quiet for a moment. Then Ray said something like that. "Ray is right," Megan said. "Don't lose that. But the community meeting happened on a Friday evening in September. Claire had been asked to speak by a local advocacy group that worked with survivors of domestic legal abuse, a term she'd learned in the months after the hearing, a term that named something she'd lived through but hadn't had a word for. She had agreed because Megan had said it mattered, and because something in her understood that the next person going through what she'd gone through deserved to walk into a room where someone had already survived it and was willing to say so out loud. She prepared for 2 weeks. She wrote notes and then threw them away and wrote different ones. She practiced in front of her bathroom mirror at 11 o'clock at night after Eli was asleep, which was the only truly quiet time in her life. She revised. She cut things. She added other things back. On the night of the meeting, she sat in the car outside the community center for 4 minutes before she went in. She wasn't afraid of the room. She was afraid of saying the wrong thing, of making what happened to her seem like a story with a clean ending when she knew in the way of someone who was still living through the aftermath that the ending was ongoing and complicated and sometimes still hard in ways she hadn't expected. She went in anyway, because being scared didn't mean you stopped doing what was right. She said that to herself in the elevator and almost laughed at the fact that she was quoting a 20-year-old mechanic to herself at a community meeting. The room held about 60 people, families mostly, attorneys, a few advocates, 2 journalists who had been covering the Meridian investigation, and in the back in a row of seats that might have been insufficient for the number of large men occupying them, Ray and Bear and 4 of the other riders in their cuts, looking exactly as out of place and exactly as absolutely present as they had in the courthouse hallway. Noah was beside Ray. He looked at Claire when she walked in. She looked back. Something passed between them in that look, not warmth exactly, though warmth was part of it, more like the recognition between 2 people who have been through something together and know without having to say it what the other person went through to get to this room. She walked to the front. She said what she'd prepared mostly. She talked about what it felt like to be surveilled, not the mechanics of it, but the lived experience of it. The way it made you doubt your own perception. The way it made you smaller, not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones, each one barely noticeable until you looked up one day and realized you'd been living in a crouch. She talked about telling her attorney and being told she was probably imagining it. She's not a bad attorney, Claire said. She's actually a brilliant attorney, but without evidence, I was just a woman saying something that couldn't be proven. And being a woman saying something that can't be proven, she paused. Most of us know what that feels like. The room was quiet in the particular way of people recognizing something from their own lives. What changed everything, Claire said, was not a dramatic moment. It was not a confrontation or a heroic intervention or a scene from something you'd see in a film. She paused. It was a 20-year-old mechanic who noticed something that didn't fit. She found Noah in the back of the room. He was looking at the floor. She suspected he'd known this was coming and had decided the floor was safer than eye contact. He didn't know me, she said. He had no reason to get involved. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't security. He was a young man eating his lunch who noticed that a car's wheels were pointed the wrong direction and that an engine that should have been off was still running. She paused, and he almost didn't say anything. He told me later that he sat with it for 48 minutes, that the voice in his head kept telling him it was none of his business. She looked at the room. The voice that tells us things are none of our business is the same voice that protects the people doing harm, she said. It's the same voice that told me I was imagining things. It's the same voice that told my friend that what she was doing was just information, just background, just almost nothing. She paused. Nothing is made of almost nothings. That's what I learned. She looked toward the back of the room again. His name is Noah Bennett, she said. He works at a repair shop. He's 20 years old, and because he spoke, because he walked across a parking lot and said something to a stranger. 11 children in 3 states now have a chance at different outcomes than the ones that were being engineered for them. The room had gone completely still. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the person with the most power, Claire said. Sometimes it's the person who simply refuses to look away. She stopped. Someone started clapping. Then the whole room, Noah in the back, was still looking at the floor. Ray put a hand briefly on his shoulder. Bear made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been something else entirely. Noah looked up. Claire was still looking at him from the front of the room. He held the look. He nodded once, the small nod of someone acknowledging something that is true, even though they don't quite know what to do with the truth of it. She nodded back. After the meeting, the room loosened into the specific social texture of a gathering that has been moved by something and doesn't quite want to end. People stayed and talked the way they do when a room has held something real and nobody wants to be the first one to walk back out into ordinary life. Noah ended up outside where the air was cooler and the street sounds were a relief after an hour of emotional density. He stood there for a few minutes before Ray came and leaned against the wall beside him. They stayed quiet for a moment. "You all right?" Ray asked. "Yeah," Noah said. He gestured vaguely. "A lot." "It's a lot," Ray agreed. "She said 11 children." "Yeah, and there might be more that they haven't connected yet." "Probably," Ray said. Noah looked at the street. A car passed ordinary engine running at the right frequency, wheels straight on the road. He tracked it automatically and then caught himself tracking it and almost laughed. "I can't stop," he said. "Stop what?" "Noticing things, where's engines when something's off." He shook his head slightly. "I clock it before I decide to." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then "Good." "It's a lot of work," Noah said. "Being in a parking lot is a lot of work now." Ray looked at him sideways with something that was almost a smile. "You know what I was doing before you walked over to me that afternoon?" "No." "Nothing," Ray said. "We were stopping for coffee. That's all we had going on. A Thursday afternoon coffee stop at a diner." He paused. "And then you walked over." Noah thought about that, the randomness of it, the simple contingent could have been otherwise quality of the fact that 12 motorcycles had pulled into that particular parking lot on that particular Thursday at that particular time. "Good timing," Noah said. "Is that what it was?" Ray said. Noah thought about it more carefully. "Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter what it was. It just happened. And then we all made choices inside what happened." Ray nodded slowly. "That's more or less how everything works." Bear appeared in the doorway and looked at both of them. "There's food inside. Someone brought food." "We're coming," Ray said. Bear disappeared back inside. Ray pushed off the wall and looked at Noah. "You don't need to become something different than what you are," Ray said. "You understand that whatever the next thing is, the depositions, the appeals, whatever, Megan needs, you don't do it by becoming different. You do it the same way you did the parking lot. By noticing things. By trusting yourself when you notice them," Ray said. "The noticing was always there. The trusting was the thing you did that day." Noah held that. It was true, and it was the kind of true that sat differently than other truths, not comfortable, not uncomfortable, just solid, something you could stand on. "Come on," Ray said. "Food." They went back inside. Dial. 2 months later, the Patricia Hale appeal was filed. The documentation was 47 pages. The foundation of it was the Meridian methodology evidence, the financial records, Blaine's cooperation, and Melissa's full account. And on page 12, as the anchor of the argument that the surveillance methodology itself constituted deliberate legal fraud, was Noah's statement. Verbatim, exactly as he'd written it in a diner parking lot on a Thursday afternoon. The wheel angle, the engine idle, the timing of the movement inside the vehicle, 48 minutes of observation by a 20-year-old mechanic who noticed things and had learned to trust what he noticed. Patricia Hale read it in Janet Morse's office with her own attorney beside her. She got to the part about the wheels being turned toward the exit, the engine running, the hands moving to the steering wheel, and she stopped reading. "This person," she said, "this Noah, he never met me." "No," Janet said. "He doesn't know anything about my case." "He didn't at the time," Janet said. "He knows more now." Patricia looked at the statement for another moment. "What he saw, that's exactly what I felt. For months, the feeling that someone was there just outside the edge of what I could see. And nobody believed me." She paused. "And then, this person, this stranger, writes down exactly what that looked like from the outside." She set the document down on the desk. "Does he know," she asked, "that this is being used?" "He gave permission," Janet said. "He knows." Patricia nodded. She didn't say anything else about it. But she picked up the statement one more time before she left, and she held it briefly with both hands. The way people hold things they want to feel the weight of. And then she set it back down and walked out into the next part of her fight. Eli turned 8 on a Saturday in November. Claire made a cake chocolate, 2 layers, the kind that looks slightly imperfect because it was made with actual effort. rather than purchased from a store, which is always in the way of 7 and 8-year-olds everywhere, more impressive than something that looks professional. She had invited a small group, Sandra from next door, two of Eli's school friends, and their parents, Megan, who brought wine and stayed exactly 2 hours and left with the efficiency of a person who loves children but also knows herself, and Noah, who arrived with Ray, which meant Bear also came, which meant that Eli's 8th birthday party included 3 Hells Angels, sitting in Claire's living room, eating chocolate cake with 8-year-olds, which was objectively the best possible version of his birthday. Eli sat next to Ray and asked him approximately 40 questions about motorcycles in the space of 20 minutes. Ray answered all of them with the same serious adult-to-adult gravity that Caleb used, and Eli absorbed every answer with the focused attention of someone who had decided this information mattered. Noah watched from across the room and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time and didn't quite have a name for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was inside it. More like rightness, like being in a room where the things that were supposed to be happening were happening, and nothing was wrong and nothing needed to be noticed or fixed or warned about. Just a room full of people who'd found each other through a series of ordinary and extraordinary choices and had, against a variety of odds, ended up here. At a birthday party, with cake. Eli came over to him at one point holding a piece of cake on a plate with the careful two-handed grip of someone transporting something precious. "Noah," he said. "Hey, buddy. Ray says you can tell if a car is broken just by listening to it." "Sometimes," Noah said. "How do you know what to listen for?" Noah thought about the question. It deserved a real answer. "You learn what the right sound is supposed to be," he said, "and then you pay attention to anything that doesn't match it." Eli ate a bite of cake, thought about this. "Is that how you knew the car in the parking lot was wrong?" he asked. "It didn't sound right." "Not the sound," Noah said. "The position, the way it was sitting, the way it was waiting. But you knew it wasn't right." "Yeah." How Noah looked at him, this 8-year-old with frosting on his lip and a serious look in his eyes that was older than 8. The kind of seriousness that grows in kids who have felt the world shift underneath them and have been watching carefully ever since to make sure they can feel it coming next time. "Because I've seen a lot of things that are right," Noah said, "and when something isn't, it feels different. It doesn't match." Eli nodded slowly, the information going somewhere inside him where it would likely stay. "I want to learn that," he said. "You already do it," Noah said. "Kids are actually better at it than adults. Adults learn to ignore the feeling. Kids haven't learned that yet." Eli considered this. "Why do adults ignore it?" "Because being right about something wrong is uncomfortable," Noah said. "And a lot of people decide that comfortable is better than right." Eli looked at him. "That's dumb," he said. Noah laughed. "Yeah," he said. "It kind of is." Eli went back to Ray with his empty cake plate and his new information, and Noah sat with the specific quiet of a person who has just been reminded by an 8-year-old with frosting on his face why any of it matters. That evening, after the guests had gone and Eli was in bed negotiating the nightly hallway light argument with the specific determined energy of a child who has had an excellent day and does not want it to officially end, Claire sat on the front steps. Noah was still there. He'd stayed to help with cleanup and then hadn't quite left, the way you don't leave a place when you're comfortable in it and nobody has asked you to go. He sat beside her. The evening was cool. The street was quiet in the way of residential streets at 8 o'clock on a Saturday. The specific quiet that means everyone is inside warm, doing the small private things that make up a life. "He's going to be okay," Noah said. "I know," Claire said. "I know he is." The supervised visits. Daniel. All of it, he's going to get through it. "Kids are more resilient than adults give them credit for," Claire said. Then she smiled slightly. "He told me tonight he wants to learn how engines work." "Caleb will teach him," Noah said. "He likes Eli." "Caleb likes Eli because Eli asked him 40 questions." "Caleb respects people who want to understand how things work," Noah said. "Eli clearly wants to understand how things work." "He gets that from me," Claire said. "Then I used to think that was a liability, the wanting to understand, the noticing when something's off." She paused. "For a long time, it just made me anxious, made me feel like I was always waiting for something to go wrong." "Maybe that's how it starts," Noah said, "and then you figure out what to do with it." She looked at him sideways. "Is that what happened to you?" "I thought about it honestly. I think I always noticed things. I just didn't always know if I should say something about it. He paused. That day in the parking lot, I sat with it for 48 minutes because I was trying to talk myself out of saying anything. What finally made you do it? He was quiet for a moment. You came outside with that to-go bag, he said, and you looked at your phone and you had this expression, he paused, like someone holding a lot of things up at once and trying not to drop any of them. And I thought about whatever was at the center of all that effort. He paused again. And then I thought about the car and about what I knew about that car. And those two things, you and what I knew, they didn't fit together. They shouldn't have been in the same picture. Claire was quiet. So I went and said something, he said, and that was it. That was all it was. She nodded. Then she said, Noah. Yeah. You're going to spend your whole life noticing things, she said, engines, cars, people, things that don't fit. She looked at him directly. Don't stop. He looked back. I won't, he said. And he meant it not as a promise to her, specifically not as a dramatic declaration of purpose, but in the simple, settled way of someone who has understood something about themselves that won't now be ununderstood. He was a person who noticed things. He was a person who trusted what he noticed. He was a person who spoke even when the voice in his head told him it was none of his business, because he had learned in a parking lot in northern Ohio on a Thursday afternoon that the voice that says stay out of it is the voice that protects the wrong side. He would notice things for the rest of his life. He would speak when he noticed them, and sometimes nothing would come of it, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes everything would. The street was quiet. Somewhere inside the house, Eli had finally negotiated the hallway light into its correct position and gone silent, the way children go silent when they're actually finally fully asleep. That particular complete stillness, that is one of the most reassuring sounds in the world. Claire heard it and let out a slow breath. Noah heard it too. Good night, he said. Good night, Noah. He walked to his car, an older model reliable with a small irregularity in the idle that he'd been meaning to fix and kept not getting around to, and drove home through quiet streets, watching the road the way he always watched the road. Noticing the things that fit and the things that didn't, trusting the difference. 3 states, 14 cases, 11 children, 1 federal investigation, 1 appeal filed, more coming, 1 8-year-old sleeping peacefully in a house that was against significant effort to the contrary, still his home, and 1 20-year-old mechanic who had almost on a Thursday afternoon, with an unfinished sandwich and a voice in his head saying it was none of his business, looked away. He hadn't looked away. That was the whole story. That was every bit of it. One person in one moment choosing to trust what they saw, and everything that was possible because of that choice, spreading outward like light through a space that had been dark for a very long time. The car that shouldn't have been there had been there. Noah Bennett had seen it. And because he had seen it and spoken and stayed, 12 riders had moved. 1 attorney had fought, 1 friend had told the truth. 1 judge had seen clearly, and 14 families had been given back the thing that had been taken from them piece by piece in the dark, the chance to stand in their own lives and be believed. You don't need a badge to matter. You just need to refuse to look away.